Welcome in, everybody. Ready to dive into a really fascinating case.
Absolutely. I've been looking over the material you sent me, and
It's someone else, right?
it really is, yeah.
The Great Plains Butcher, Eugene Butler. This one's out of North Dakota,
Oh, wow.
and it comes to us from a collection of historical newspaper clippings and some additional research from Wikipedia.
Okay.
And the thing that really grabbed me right away with this one is that uh, Butler's crimes weren't even discovered until after he died.
Oh, wow.
So investigators had this whole puzzle to put together, like a time capsule almost.
Yeah, trying to understand him, the era, everything.
Yeah, and the Dakota Territory in the late 19th century, that's a whole different
Oh,
world.
absolutely. That kind of isolation, it really shapes a person.
Totally. And, he was born in New York around 1849, but then heads to the Dakota Territory like 1882,
Okay.
buys himself a 480-acre farm in Niagara, North Dakota.
Wow. So you can already imagine the remoteness.
Oh, yeah. Completely isolated, and the sources mention he had no wife, hardly any social interaction,
Like a ghost almost.
almost vanished into that landscape. And
And
then,
then it gets even stranger, right? The mental illness starts to show.
oh yeah, the sources talk about hallucinations, feeling pursued by like invisible things, even these scary nighttime horseback rides.
I can just imagine how unsettling that must have been for anyone who saw it.
Oh, absolutely. Screaming through the night.
It makes you wonder how people back then would have interpreted that with their understanding of mental illness.
It's a totally different world back then, right?
Oh, yeah. Mental illness carried a huge stigma.
Treatments were basic. People probably thought it was like supernatural or something.
Probably looked at him with a mix of fear and maybe some suspicion, some dread.
And eventually that fear leads to him being committed to the North Dakota State Hospital in Jamestown.
Under Dr. W.M. Hotchkiss.
Right, and this is where we get a glimpse into how troubled he really was, like his fear of cameras.
The belief that they steal your soul.
Yeah.
It is. But, it reflects the anxieties of that time, too. The camera was a new invention.
Oh, right, like a form of sorcery or something.
Exactly. So his fear wasn't totally unique, but it shows how new technology can kind of clash with old beliefs.
It's like this early foreshadowing of how technology just kept blurring the lines of reality in the years that followed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
But then, this is where the story gets really dark.
Oh, no.
2 years after Butler dies at the asylum in 1915,
Okay.
workmen are renovating his farmhouse, and they uncover something horrifying.
What was it?
Multiple human skeletons.
Oh, my God.
And not just neatly buried. We're talking
Oh.
skulls crushed, some with broken legs, just brutal.
Really paints a picture of the violence that happened there.
It does, and it makes you think about Butler's psychology. Like in modern criminology, we look for a signature.
Oh, right. Like a specific thing the killer does that might tell us why.
Exactly. The way he killed them might give us clues about his mental state, what drove him to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So now they've got these skeletons, a horrifying discovery, and the investigation begins.
Right.
But identifying the victims, that's a whole other challenge.
I bet.
At first, they think maybe it's a missing family,
Okay.
but that idea gets tossed out pretty quickly.
Why's that?
Nobody remembered any families disappearing, and it couldn't have been relatives of Dutler.
He would have had to, kill them right after he moved in.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, this is the early 20th century, no DNA testing, no fancy forensics.
So how did they even start figuring out who these people were?
It was like a puzzle with half the pieces missing, right?
Yeah.
They had to rely on the physical evidence, missing person reports, old school detective work,
Wow, that's tough.
but the pieces they do find start to paint a really grim picture.
What did they find?
All young men, most likely those farmhands that drifted through looking for work.
Oh, the transients.
Yeah, and it explains why nobody really noticed they were gone.
They didn't have strong ties to the community, no family nearby.
Makes them almost invisible to society. Even today, it's a reminder of how vulnerable people on the margins can be.
That's a powerful point.
And it seems Butler took advantage of that vulnerability.
How so?
They found the bodies naked, no clothes, nothing.
He must have burned them or something.
To get rid of evidence, and get this, he had a trapdoor built into his house foundation.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just a random act. He planned this.
A disturbing level of premeditation.
Hiding in plain sight the whole time.
And then, to make it even worse, you've got those souvenir hunters.
No way. People were taking bones from the crime scene.
It's crazy, but it shows how true crime can capture the public's imagination, even back then.
It's morbid, but it's true.
It hampered the investigation, robbed the victims of a proper burial. It's just a whole other ethical mess.
Wow, yeah.
So we've got this seemingly ordinary farmer leading a double life, these brutal murders, and a community just reeling.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but amidst all the darkness, there's a little bit of hope. A man named Leo Urbanski contacts the authorities. He thinks one of the victims might be his brother, John.
He just disappeared.
Yeah, went missing. But what makes this lead so interesting is a letter John sent to Leo before he vanished.
Okay.
In the letter, John mentions working for a bachelor in Niagara.
And that's where Butler lived.
Right. And to make it even more intriguing, the letter was postmarked from Larimore, the same town where Butler did all his business.
So it's like a direct link back to him.
It's like a breadcrumb trail leading right to that farm.
This is incredible.
It really makes you think, without that letter, would anyone ever know who these men were?
It's possible they would have remained nameless. Yeah.
Lost to time.
It's tragic, isn't it?
It is. But John, writing that letter home, it's a sliver of hope, a connection.
A reminder that even the smallest details can be important. You never know.
You never know. And speaking of details, the Grand Forks County Sheriff's Department, they made an appeal in 2016.
Oh, wow. For this case, after all this time.
Yeah, they were looking for new leads, hoping maybe someone, somewhere, remembered something.
Like, what kind of information were they looking for?
Anything really, a family story, a diary, a photo, anything that could shed some light.
Like a missing piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And with DNA technology these days, even a tiny piece of evidence could be huge.
Imagine if someone who took one of those bones as a souvenir came forward.
It's almost unbelievable to think that could happen.
But it could. It really could.
The case could be solved. It's amazing that after all this time, there's still that chance.
The power of persistence, huh?
It is. And even if we never learn everyone's names, their stories still matter.
They do. They remind us that everyone has a story, no matter their circumstances.
These farmhands, they might have seemed invisible back then, but they had hopes, dreams, families.
And it shows how vulnerable people can be, especially when they're on the margins of society.
Absolutely. And that vulnerability, it's something Butler seems to have taken advantage of.
In what way?
The investigation showed the bodies were buried naked, no clothes, nothing.
Trying to hide any trace of them?
Exactly. And remember that trapdoor.
Oh, yeah. It's chilling to think about.
He planned this. It wasn't just a random act of violence.
Makes you wonder, was it all driven by mental illness, or was there something more, something evil?
It's tough to say. We see the signs of his mental state deteriorating.
The hallucinations, the paranoia.
Right. But then there's the premeditation, too.
The way he got rid of the bodies, the trap door.
It's like a mix of factors. Mental illness can be so complex.
It's not always black and white. It can be hard to separate illness from someone's actions.
Exactly. It's messy. Human behavior is messy.
And that's what makes cases like this so interesting. They challenge us to think differently.
It's a reminder that the past isn't just some story in a book. These were real people.
They lived, they loved, they suffered.
And sometimes they did terrible things.
But even the darkest stories can teach us something.
Now, you mentioned Butler's time at the asylum. What was that like back then?
Right. So the sources say he actually found some comfort in the asylum's routine. Yeah, Dr. A.W. Guest described him as gallant. Even said he enjoyed the hospital dances.
It's hard to picture that after everything else we know.
It shows a different side of him, a reminder that even in darkness, there can be flickers of light.
It makes you think about how much our understanding of mental illness has changed.
Back then, asylums were more about control than healing.
Like a warehouse almost.
Right. Today, we understand mental health so much better. The treatments are more advanced.
We see mental illness as a medical condition, not a weakness.
Exactly. It requires care and support.
Makes you wonder, if Butler had been born in a different time, would things have been different?
It's a question we can't really answer, but it's a powerful one.
It shows how important mental health awareness is and access to the right care.
Absolutely, both then and now.
And it reminds us that even in the darkest situations, there's always hope.
Yeah, it really makes you think all those what ifs. Like, if we understood mental illness better back then, would any of this have happened?
It's a tough question, but it's one this case keeps bringing up. We've gone over a lot. The discoveries on the farm, the mystery of the victims, early forensics, mental illness.
It's a lot.
It is. So what do you think is the most significant part of all this? What really sticks with you?
I think for me, it's that we still don't know who most of the victims were.
Yeah.
We know they were probably farmhands just passing through, but their names, their stories,
It's like they're lost.
it's like they never existed, and it makes you think about all the people history forgets, you know?
The ones who get overlooked.
And it's important to remember them, to try and give them a voice, even now.
I agree. It would be easy to just see this as another true crime story, but these were real people.
With real lives, and those lives deserve to be remembered, honored, even if we don't know all the details.
Absolutely. And it's incredible to think that even after 100 years, there's still a chance we might learn more.
Maybe someone has a family story, or found an old diary.
Maybe some long-lost photo turns up. And with DNA testing, you never know.
It could happen. One tiny clue could change everything.
It shows how history is never really over. There's always something new to discover.
Yeah, the past can surprise you.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Great Plains Butcher, it leaves you with a lot to think about.
Definitely a sense of unease, but also a curiosity to understand more.
It makes you question good and evil, mental illness, the way humans search for answers.
And it reminds us that history isn't just facts in a textbook. It's about real people.
With real lives, real experiences, real secrets.
And even the darkest parts of history, they can teach us something valuable.
So keep exploring this case, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the power of even the smallest detail.
You never know what you might find.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.